Catherine Zeta-Jones has long been admired as one of Hollywood's most radiant stars. With her vintage beauty, her sharp poise, and her magnetic screen presence, she seemed destined to stand among cinematic royalty. Yet the true story of Catherine's life is far more complex than the glamorous photographs and red carpet appearances suggest. Behind her glowing smile lies a past filled with invisible battles, private wounds, and tragedies that even fame and fortune could not erase. Her life is not just a tale of Oscars and applause. It is also one of survival, resilience, and quiet defiance against overwhelming odds. Her story begins far from the dazzling lights of Hollywood, in the modest industrial town of Swansea, Wales. Born on September 25, 1969, Catherine grew up in a working-class household. Her father, David, ran a small bakery, while her mother, Patricia, was a seamstress who stitched clothes with quiet dedication. Their life was simple, filled with early mornings, long shifts, and the small routines of a family doing its best to provide stability. But fate had a dramatic twist waiting for the little girl who would one day enchant millions. At just a toddler, Catherine faced a life-threatening crisis. A severe viral infection left her struggling to breathe, and doctors had no choice but to perform an emergency tracheotomy. A small incision was cut into her throat to keep her alive. Though it saved her life, the procedure left behind a faint scar just beneath her chin. For Catherine, that scar became her first wound, one she would carry silently into adulthood. It was not merely a mark on her skin, but a permanent reminder that her very first breaths had been a battle. While the world would later know her as flawless and glamorous, she herself never forgot that her story began with a fight for survival. From that fragile beginning, Catherine's childhood unfolded with unexpected opportunities. When she was just a young girl, her family's life changed dramatically after her parents won $100,000 in a national lottery. For a working-class family in the 1970s, it was a staggering amount. Yet rather than indulging in luxury, her parents made practical decisions. They moved to a better neighborhood, bought a pastry shop, and most importantly, invested heavily in nurturing Catherine's budding artistic talents. She was enrolled in dance lessons, singing classes, and stage coaching. Her father would later recall with pride, "She had that fire from the start. We just gave it air." That fire blazed brightly. By the age of 4, Catherine was already performing in local church halls. At 11, she starred in stage productions like Annie. At 13, she was dazzling audiences in Bugsy Malone in London's West End. For most children, these would have been delightful extracurricular activities. For Catherine, they were stepping stones toward a destiny that demanded sacrifices few her age could understand. With every rehearsal and every curtain call, she gave up another fragment of her childhood. There were no carefree afternoons, no lazy teenage weekends. Instead, there were long commutes, grueling schedules, and the crushing pressure to perform without faltering. In 1983, at just 14, Catherine auditioned for the national tour of The Pajama Game, directed by Mickey Dolenz of the Monkees. Not only did she win the part, she dominated it. The following year, at 15, she made a fateful choice. Offered a starring role in a West End production, she left school entirely to pursue acting full-time. For many, this decision would have seemed reckless or premature. For Catherine, there was no hesitation. As she would later reflect, "People think I was fearless, but I was just trying to keep up." There was no plan B. She was no longer a schoolgirl. She was a professional actress, navigating rooms full of adults, critics, and expectations. By the early 1990s, Catherine began testing her talents on the silver screen. Her film debut came in 1001 Nights, 1990, a French production that she hoped would launch her career internationally. Instead, it was a disaster. The film sold less than 740 tickets in France and flopped both critically and commercially. For Catherine, it was a humiliating introduction to the film industry. She had dreamed of dazzling Hollywood, but instead, her first cinematic step ended in crushing disappointment. Yet, Catherine did not give up. Returning to the UK, she rebuilt her reputation, landing the role of Mariette in the beloved TV series The Darling Buds of May, 1991-1993. British audiences adored her, and for a time, she became a household name at home. Still, Catherine longed for something greater. By the mid-1990s, she was auditioning in Hollywood, desperate to break into the American market. but the doors remained firmly closed. Casting directors dismissed her as just another pretty British face. She appeared in films like Christopher Columbus, The Discovery, 1992, Splitting Heirs, 1993, and The Phantom, 1996, but none established her as a serious star. She was haunted by rejection, admitting later that she began to doubt herself. I started to think maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't have what it took. And then, fate intervened. Legendary director Steven Spielberg happened to notice Catherine, reportedly from her performance in either The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles or the TV miniseries Titanic, 1996. Impressed by her presence, Spielberg recommended her for a role that would change everything. In 1998, Catherine was cast as Elena Montero in The Mask of Zorro, opposite Antonio Banderas. It was not an easy victory. She had to fight fiercely against competitors like Penelope Cruz and Shakira, training relentlessly in sword fighting, horseback riding, and dance. She even performed her own stunts, determined to prove herself. The result was spectacular. Catherine didn't just act in Zorro. She lit up the screen. Critics hailed her performance. Audiences fell in love. And suddenly, she wasn't just another actress. She was a star. In less than 2 years, Catherine went from struggling auditions to international fame. She followed Zorro with Entrapment, 1979, alongside Sean Connery, delivering the now iconic laser beam scene that cemented her status as a sex symbol. In Traffic, 2000, she played against type as a drug lord's conflicted wife, earning acclaim for her range. And in 2002, she delivered the performance of a lifetime as Velma Kelly in Chicago. Pregnant with her daughter at the time, Catherine danced, sang, and embodied raw charisma. Her performance won her the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress, making her one of the rare few to win an Oscar while carrying a child. That Oscar moment was more than just a career triumph, it was symbolic. Clutching the golden statue just days before giving birth, Catherine reflected, "I carried more than a child that night. I carried every role, every rejection, every bit of doubt that ever haunted me, and I let it all go." It was the peak of her Hollywood journey. But, as history often reminds us, the higher the peak, the deeper the valleys that follow. On the surface, Catherine Zeta-Jones' life after Chicago looked like a fairy tale. She had reached the pinnacle of Hollywood success, won an Academy Award, and captured the world's attention with her elegance and strength. Yet, just as her career soared, her personal life entered its most fragile and heartbreaking chapter. Behind the glittering gowns and flashing cameras was a woman quietly enduring emotional storms that would test her resilience more than any film role ever could. It all began in 1998 at the Deauville Film Festival in France. Catherine was 28, radiant and still glowing from her breakthrough performance in The Mask of Zorro. Michael Douglas, then 53 and already a Hollywood icon, was attending the same festival. They were introduced through mutual friends. What happened next would spark one of Hollywood's most scrutinized romances. Michael approached her with a line that sounded more like something out of a script than real life. "You're going to be the mother of my children." Catherine was stunned, even offended. To her, it felt arrogant, rehearsed, and presumptuous. She excused herself quickly, assuming she would never see him again. But Michael, known for his persistence both on and off screen, sent her roses shortly afterward with a handwritten note of apology. What could have been dismissed as an awkward encounter slowly transformed into something more. They began speaking on the phone, sometimes for hours. Their conversations moved beyond pleasantries into deep discussions about childhood, parents, fears, and dreams. Catherine later admitted that she had never expected to fall in love with a man 25 years her senior, but something in Michael's honesty and vulnerability disarmed her. What began as polite exchanges evolved into a connection she could not ignore. By New Year's Eve of 1999, both of them ill with the flu and wrapped in blankets in Aspen, Michael pulled out a vintage 10-carat diamond ring and asked her to marry him. It wasn't glamorous. It was imperfect, human, and real. Catherine said yes. Within months, they discovered she was pregnant. On November 18, 2000, in a $1.5 million ceremony at the Plaza Hotel in New York City, Catherine Zeta-Jones married Michael Douglas. Their newborn son, Dylan, just 3 months old, was present, cradled in Michael's arms. The guest list was star-studded. Tom Hanks, Jennifer Aniston, Steven Spielberg, Sharon Stone. It was the definition of a Hollywood wedding. Yet even in this dazzling moment, Catherine felt the price of her fame. Paparazzi from Hello magazine snuck unauthorized photos of the ceremony, forcing Catherine and Michael to sue. Though they won in court, she confessed that the intrusion robbed her of her dream wedding. "My day was trespassed upon," she said, realizing for the first time the heavy cost of being not just a star, but a celebrity wife. The following years seemed blissful. Catherine and Michael welcomed their daughter, Karis, in 2003. They retreated to Bermuda, hoping for privacy and stability away from the frenzy of Los Angeles and New York. For 6 years, they lived quietly on the island, raising their children in peace. Catherine once reflected, "It was the first time in my life I didn't hear the word action for months, and I loved it." To the outside world, it seemed idyllic, yet inside, shadows were beginning to creep in. After the birth of her second child, Catherine began experiencing mood swings, exhaustion, and periods of deep depression. She would later be diagnosed with bipolar II disorder, a mental health condition characterized by cycles of depression and hypomanic episodes. But at the time, she kept her suffering private. Hollywood was not kind to those who revealed vulnerability. She feared judgment, gossip, and the pitying looks that often followed public admissions of mental illness. And so, she smiled for cameras, posed for red carpets, and carried on with the flawless image the world expected, even while unraveling in silence. Her challenges only deepened as her family faced new crises. In 2009, Michael's eldest son from a previous marriage, Cameron Douglas, was arrested for drug-related offenses and later sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. The media swarmed on the story, and Catherine, already fragile, now found herself trying to shield her own children from the headlines while supporting a devastated husband. Just as the family began adjusting to that pain, another blow landed. In 2010, Michael was diagnosed with stage 4 throat cancer. The news shook Catherine's world to its core. She spent months at his side as he underwent aggressive rounds of chemotherapy and radiation. She recalled sitting by his hospital bed, watching the once charismatic man, who had lit up every room, now shivering under blankets, too weak to speak. The ordeal left her emotionally broken. And then, as if the illness itself wasn't enough, the family was dragged into public scandal. In a candid interview, Michael attributed his cancer to HPV, a sexually transmitted virus. Though it was scientifically possible, the press seized on his words, twisting them into lurid headlines. Catherine, already crumbling under pressure, suddenly found herself the subject of cruel insinuations and invasive speculation. Friends said she felt humiliated, betrayed, and stripped of dignity. It wasn't just the cancer, it was how easily the world forgot we were just trying to survive, she confided. By 2011, the weight was unbearable. Catherine quietly checked herself into a mental health facility in Connecticut for treatment. When the news inevitably leaked, she made a decision that would change her legacy. Rather than deny it, she spoke openly. "This is a disorder that affects millions of people," she told the press. "I'm not ashamed. Mental health is not something to hide." With that one statement, Catherine shattered decades of stigma in Hollywood. Fans wrote her letters by the thousands, thanking her for her honesty. She had turned her private suffering into a public act of courage. Still, the storms kept coming. In 2013, Catherine and Michael announced they were taking time apart. The tabloids erupted with rumors of infidelity, alcoholism, and betrayal. The truth was quieter, but no less painful. They were exhausted, broken in different ways, and needed space to heal. Catherine later said, "We needed time. Both of us were in pieces." For nearly a year, they lived apart, their marriage seemingly over. Yet, against the odds, they chose each other again. Quietly, without fanfare, they reunited. No press conference, no dramatic declaration. Just two people reaching for each other in the dark, believing that love, if real, does not walk away. The years that followed were marked by recovery, but also by more challenges. In 2017, Cameron Douglas was released from prison and became a father himself, bringing healing to the fractured family. For Catherine, it was a moment of hope. Yet in 2018, new allegations of sexual misconduct against Michael surfaced. Though he denied them and no evidence substantiated the claims, Catherine was shaken. "I didn't sign up for perfect," she would later say. "I signed up for love, and love means standing still in the chaos." She stood by him publicly, though privately, she was said to be heartbroken by the ordeal. By the time she entered her 50s, Catherine had weathered storms most would not survive: mental illness, her husband's cancer, media humiliation, separation, and the crushing weight of public judgment. Her face still lit up magazine covers, but her eyes carried shadows. And yet, she endured. As she later reflected, love is not about perfection. It's about endurance, forgiveness, and waking up the next day still choosing each other. For Catherine Zeta-Jones, the true wedding was not the one at the Plaza Hotel in 2000. It was every morning after, every choice to stay, every storm survived hand in hand. By the time Catherine Zeta-Jones reached her early 50s, her life had already been a whirlwind of dazzling triumphs and heartbreaking lows. She had survived the cutthroat climb to Hollywood stardom, navigated the turbulence of a marriage under constant scrutiny, endured mental illness, and stood by her husband as he battled life-threatening cancer. Yet, when the curtain of public drama finally began to lift, Catherine discovered something she had been searching for all along. Not perfection, not applause, but peace. As Dylan and Karis, her 2 children with Michael Douglas, grew older and eventually left for college, Catherine entered what she described as the third act of her life. It was a stage not defined by fame or relentless ambition, but by stillness, reflection, and a new understanding of who she truly was. In a 2020 interview, she admitted, "I've been many things: daughter, wife, mother, star. But these days, I just want to be still. I want to be whole." For a woman who had lived her life beneath the unblinking eye of the camera, this desire for simplicity was revolutionary. Her daily life shifted away from Hollywood's glare. She and Michael spent time between their luxurious villa in Mallorca, Spain, and an apartment in Manhattan overlooking Central Park. Their Spanish estate, worth an estimated $33 million, was more than just a property. It was a sanctuary. Surrounded by olive groves and stone walls that had stood for centuries, Catherine found herself reconnecting with nature, with quiet mornings, and with a deeper sense of grounding. Friends who visited described evenings filled not with red carpets, but with barefoot dancing to jazz records in the living room. Catherine and Michael, laughing like 2 souls who had weathered enough storms to finally appreciate the calm. Professionally, Catherine stepped into selective roles that reminded the world of her enduring magnetism. In 2022, she captivated audiences once again in Netflix's Wednesday, playing Morticia Addams with a haunting elegance that proved reinvention was her forte. Even though she was no longer in every film or at every awards show, her appearances were events, moments where the world collectively looked up and remembered the force she still carried. For Catherine, it was never about quantity. It was about impact. When she appeared, she made people take notice. At the same time, she built a second empire off-screen. Her lifestyle brand, Casa Zeta-Jones, expanded into home decor, luxury bedding, cosmetics, and fashion. The brand reflected her taste for timeless beauty, understated elegance, and her desire to create comfort and sanctuary for others. Endorsements and partnerships helped her amass a personal net worth estimated at $150 million, but Catherine herself often shrugged off such figures. "A beautiful home is only beautiful if it holds peace," she once said. To her, the worth of life was not measured in money or awards, but in the presence of joy, love, and serenity. Yet even in these later years, the shadows of her past remained. Her struggle with bipolar II disorder never disappeared. "It doesn't go away," she admitted candidly. "You learn to live with it, manage it. But some mornings, it still hurts to get out of bed." Instead of hiding, she embraced the reality of her ongoing battle. She spoke openly about her wellness routines: yoga, meditation, a macrobiotic diet, and mindful practices that helped her maintain balance. She started her mornings with lemon water and breathing exercises, focusing on honoring survival rather than chasing youth. "It's not about staying young," she told one interviewer. "It's about respecting what you've been through." That honesty resonated with fans who saw in her not just a glamorous actress, but a human being willing to acknowledge her fragility. Perhaps the most powerful image of Catherine in recent years was not on screen, but in a candid photograph captured by paparazzi. She stood barefoot on a balcony, wrapped in a linen robe, her hair messy, sipping coffee as the morning sun hit her face. There was no makeup, no styling, no staged pose. Just a woman who had survived decades of storms and was learning to simply exist. For many, that picture represented her truest legacy. Not the Oscar, not the glamorous gowns, but the resilience of a woman who had been through darkness and still found a way to savor the light. Her marriage to Michael Douglas also evolved in these later years. After decades of public scrutiny, separations, reunions, and endless speculation, they found a rhythm that worked for them. Catherine once mused, "Sometimes both partners need their own sky to see the same stars." While they often spent time in different places, her in Mallorca, him in New York or Los Angeles, they remained connected through daily calls and frequent visits. It was not the picture-perfect marriage Hollywood demanded, but it was real, built on endurance and mutual respect. They had discovered that love was not about grand gestures, but about staying through the chaos, forgiving when it was hardest, and quietly choosing each other again and again. Beyond her own family, Catherine began to think about legacy. She quietly set up scholarships in Wales to support young actors, ensuring that other children with dreams like hers would have opportunities even if they lacked resources. She also began planning her estate, creating trusts for her children and for artistic causes. It was clear she was thinking about the future not as a star, but as a mother, a mentor, and a woman aware of the passage of time. When asked in an interview what scared her most, she replied simply, "Wasting time. That's the only thing I don't have an endless supply of anymore." As Catherine turned 55, the headlines often spoke of tragedy. They pointed to her bipolar disorder, her husband's illnesses, the separations, the public humiliations, the battles with stigma. And yes, those chapters are undeniably heartbreaking. But tragedy is not the whole story. Just as her scar beneath her chin reminds her of survival, so too does her life remind us that scars, whether visible or invisible, can hold strength. Catherine herself put it best. Mental health is not something to be ashamed of. In saying those words, she gave millions permission to admit their own struggles, to step out of silence, and to embrace healing. Her legacy, then, is not just in films like Chicago or Zorro, nor in the Oscar that sits on her shelf. It is in her willingness to live authentically, to confront pain openly, and to model resilience for a world that often demands perfection. She showed that strength does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "Keep going." For anyone watching her journey, the dreamers, the caregivers, the quiet fighters who battle invisible storms, Catherine's story is a reminder that survival itself can be the greatest role of all. Behind every smile may lie a hidden battle, but behind every battle is also the possibility of grace. Catherine has taught us that healing is not linear, peace is not automatic, and love is not perfect. Yet through it all, life is still worth the fight. And so, as Catherine Zeta-Jones stands at 55, her scar beneath the chin is more than a childhood memory. It is a beacon, a light for others navigating their own darkness. Her story doesn't end with applause. It lives on in every person she has inspired to rise after falling, to breathe through the pain, and to believe that survival, in its quietest form, is its own kind of triumph.